Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to the ninth episode of ReCompute podcast. Just recording, we started the discussion without recording for a couple of minutes. So it's a bit of a rerun for the rest of us. But as usual, I am joined by Junaid from Lahore and Noman from London. And we are very happy to be joined today by our guest, Mohammad Nasrullah. Nasrullah and I go way back to our time as undergrad students at GIK. But since then, Nasrullah has been basically a serial entrepreneur, and he's currently CEO at Integry. Lekin I'd ask Nasrullah to tell us about himself, maybe starting with his time at university. Over to you.
Thank you so much for Karan. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Nasrullah. Most of my friends also call me Nash. I was with Bakar in GIKI. I was there from 2000 that I started, and I did my bachelor's there in electronics engineering. And later on, I shifted my degrees to computer systems. So I like to do a little bit of both. I've done 4 companies so far. They're all been high-tech companies, and I'm usually technical or the CEO or the CTO, the chief technology officer. And I started all the way back with my first company, which was a computer-based training, CBT. And what we do was we would help new people entering the market learn Microsoft Office. So we'd have this computer-based training simulation where you could learn different things about how to use Word, how to print documents, and so on. And from there, I went into the telecom space. We had a company in there. We had a company in the gaming space. And then we did a social network, one of the largest in Pakistan, which we had more than 8 billion users. It was an SMS-based social network around the same time as Pring. And then we sold that company to Receive Networks at Rosie. And then I started this current company a few years ago. This is Integry. And this is a US-based company. And what we do is we help software developers create software that is integratable. It's basically, we help software developers create customer-facing integrations. So for example, let's say you buy a software like a CRM or even an education software, you very likely have other software that you've already purchased. So what we do is we help that software integrate with the existing software so you can build automations on top. It can be anything to integrating with the financial system, connecting the admission system with the course registration system, or for example, employee leave system with payroll and things like that. And so it's basically adding a layer of automation on top, which helps you leverage your existing investments in software. It sounds very boring. I like to say it is internet plumbing. It's moving bytes from one place to the other, but that's sort of the idea over here. And so, yeah, so that's a quick intro.
In the Xbox. So, can I ask maybe, it connects to a question we had later on, but you started off in with your own company, like straight off the bat almost, right? So I think it's 2004 में पहली company बनाई आपने.
बिल्कुल.
हाँ, तो थोड़ा सा अपने thought process के बारे में बताओ. Like you are graduating from GIK. For me, startup, 20 more years after graduation, it feels like something, I don't know where I would begin. But how did you get into that space so quickly after graduation? So was that something that happened, or was that something that was always a goal for you?
It's an interesting question. So we have a family tutor which has taught multiple generations in my family. And he tells me when I was 5 or 6 years old, he asked me, where did I want to be when I grew up? And he said, he looked at me and I said, I want to be an inventor. And he's like, but you're like a very young kid, because every kid would say doctor, engineer. And true to that, I've always wanted to be a creator, an inventor, someone who could build things. And an entrepreneur is just a practical version of that. It's just someone who just builds something and also has to look about real world implications, monetization, go to market. So it's sort of the modern day version of an inventor is an entrepreneur. So I've always wanted to do this. As a kid growing in Southeast Asia, a really big figure during this time was Bill Gates. Bill Gates was really huge as a household name. much less Steve Jobs, but during this time, so everybody would have Microsoft Windows. Everybody would know Bill Gates is the richest guy over there. And during that time frame, what was really interesting to me was this myth, or that here's the richest guy in the world, and he became rich by just using his mind. That he would just program, he would work on computers, and he became rich not because of family wealth or anything like that, but because of his own effort. Now, obviously, there are some other situations as well. The story is a little bit more complex. It also has to do with where you're born and all that. But all of that aside, he did basically create this whole new industry along with the other players. And I always looked at that and I thought, that is amazing. And I want to do something like that. I want to use my own intellect, my own abilities to create something. If he can do it sitting in his room, anybody should be able to do that. And so that has always been something in the back of my mind. As a matter of fact, before joining GIK, I actually had a sort of like an outsourcing company where we did small projects. And so me and two more friends of mine, in my final year, second year, I would basically, we were doing this project for something called Earth Club Pakistan back in the day. And when I got admission into GIK, I was actually very sad because I would have to now let go of this thing and start into education here.
Serious study.
And I would consider GIK back then as a hindrance towards what my actual goals were, funnily enough. And again, these are all thoughts of a young kid. This is, somebody who's 18, 17, just through that. So it's something I've always wanted to do. I've always thought that it's something anyone can do. At least certainly I thought I could do it. And so I had always been looking for a way to do this. So when I was in GIK, a friend of mine who was also very enterprising in Lahore, he had a customer from the UN. They had something called the International Commission on Workforce Development as a customer, and they wanted to do workforce training. And they were looking for somebody to do it. So he had the contact and he wanted someone to help implement that. So I joined in with him, and that's sort of how this genesis started. And I was, again, still studying while this idea came about. And that sort of became the first venture. But I was always looking to do something on my own. And I always wanted to make an impact. That's the most I can describe it. It's hard for me to describe what makes a person like me do this versus somebody else not wanting to do that. But it has to do a lot with some of the things I was exposed to early in my youth.
Okay. Very interesting. So, related to that, because we will sort of go forward as well, but if I take you one step further back from this, choice of electronic engineering and GIK, was that with just future entrepreneur career in mind as well, or was that maybe like myself, it was the hot thing, it was the thing you were doing if you were able to, if you got good enough marks, go to electronic engineering, right? That's kind of mostly what I did, to be honest. So was that was it for you, but much more meaningful, your choice of GIK and electronic engineering?
So unfortunately, I don't think I did a lot of research when I was at that stage. If you talk to any typical 17, 18-year-old kid, I don't think they know really a lot about the full landscape. But we did know, for example, back then that GIK was the #1 engineering institute, whether true or not, but it was in a few rankings around international rankings. So it was my #1 choice. Electronics, it's funny actually. Electronics was my #2 choice. My #1 choice was computer science. But what was interesting is that the highest merit required was electronics engineering, except for the year I took admission. For that 1 year, computer science was #1, electronics was #2. So I actually ended up going to electronics, as a matter of fact, yeah. So, and then it reversed the next year again. Electronics became the highest merit requiring faculty. But eventually I ended up over there. I had done quite a bit of electronics by then. I had built radios. I had from scratch built circuits, and also had wired up pneumatic systems. I would have built like small sized cranes and things like that. My father was a doctor. My family had a lot of doctors, so I would collect all these syringes together. I'd make these hydraulic pneumatic systems with water-filled syringes and drips connecting them. So I loved creating things by the time already. So when I got into electronics, I was actually disappointed. But I looked at the coursework, there was a lot of overlap, so I was still fine. But I never sort of stopped applying to the computer science side. So eventually I shifted my degrees in my final year and I shifted to computer science, but not before I had to learn everything about Fourier transform and all of that stuff. So वो सजा मैंने पूरी कर ली अपनी.
पूरी कर लिया.
उसके बाद
Circuit analysis 1-2 और सब चीजें की वो.
1-2 बिल्कुल. Analog, all of that, which was actually pretty great, but wasn't really my focus when it began with.
So, I mean, yeah, what you were telling about your experience of the reasons for joining GIK or just like a hobbies, they sound very different from me growing up. I was mostly like into books, reading books, and so that was very different from the kind of. So there was something in you. So quick nature nurture wise discussion, maybe it will go in a completely different dimension, but it seemed like there was something in your nature, possibly that was just driving you towards this.
I would say. And this is a very good conversation. I'm very solidly on the nurture side of that debate.
Are you? Okay.
Bilkul, but I would say a few things. My dad would push me to read a lot of books. So I would have a lot of science books, which I still have till this date. And they were basically encyclopedias or science books for children. There were a very famous book series called Tell Me Why or Did You Know? I had those CDs.
Oh, yes.
So I read a lot.
I remember
so
those.
I would read a lot of those books. So my dad bought me chemistry sets. So the radio I built was because my dad bought me this electrical set, which had these transistors and resistors, and you had to build the whole thing from scratch. And I was living in Saudi Arabia. I was born there. So and you couldn't really find that stuff in Saudi Arabia. So my dad, he was in Pakistan. He went to Frozen's and he bought this set from there, and he bought this to this kid in Saudi Arabia. And Pakistan, in that sense, was much ahead. Pakistan had better books, higher quality books. They had better science stuff in Saudi Arabia that you couldn't really find back then. In Saudi Arabia, where I was living, and so on. So that was one thing. My dad also bought me a computer, even though everybody advised him against it. Like, what? Because this is like the 80s, right? Why would you need a computer? It was an expensive thing. And there was really no use case. And so back then, there was Doogie Howser, who would write his life diary at the end of every episode on a computer. That was the only use case we knew. But then other than that, why would you use a computer? Right. But my dad still bought it. And back then, the way you worked with computers was it's like DOS, but instead of DOS, it was BASIC was the main language, how you communicate. So you had to learn to start using. This was a very old one. It's called an Auric Atmos. This was a Britain-based company that started. And it was a fairly popular, but this is back in the day when they had cassettes.
We had an Atari, so I think it's probably the same era. Yeah.
But Atari more like a consumer. This was more higher and professional. But my dad bought it, and everybody. I remember our friends, neighbors, and uncles in Saudi Arabia who would use computers at work, who would be at finance or accounting. They'd be like, "Dar saab ne kyun liya?" This is like so high end, and you're giving it to your kid. What's the point? But I picked up those books. They had programming books, how to do things, how to build games, and things like that. And so it started from there. So I very much think that there are these signals all around us that we pick up on. And so I think creators are people who build, and by creator I mean people who write papers, people who open a restaurant, people who create an idea, anything. They have a more fine-tuned antenna to listen to these things happening around them. So these signals, depending upon how you receive them and who gives them to you, I think that does really play a big role in this.
Very interesting. I think this is like useful advice for parents as well, जो कि इस तरफ nudge करना चाहें kids को. Or do you know one?
मैं पूछना चाहता था, ये तो आपका एक नेचुरल इंक्लिनेशन भी हो गया, आपके पेरेंट्स की तरफ से भी एक नर्चरिंग भी हो गई इस टाइप की. जीकी ने क्या ऐड ऑन किया इस सारी उसमें?
This is very interesting. So despite all of this, despite my exposure to computers, I grew up on Lego, so I used to spend hours sitting alone building things. So that was also another thing. My parents, I was the only kid in the family who had Legos because my parents bought them to me. As a matter of fact, I have the very first Lego set my dad bought when I was 5. I have it right here. It's like the little truck, which I did hours with this. I lost my original truck, so I found it again on eBay. I bought this 35 years later. My dad passed away a few years ago, so I bought this in remembrance. But But despite all this, when I was in GIKI, I remember sitting at a lunch. All my friends, I had different people from different parts of the world. They were obviously the best of the best. And I had somebody from Lahore. And typical Lahori fashion, because so basically you're very rowdy in your high school days, and in university you start to settle down. But we're still going through that first semester period. And so this guy was being very Lahori, show off. कि जी मैं लाहौर में बड़ी रेसें लगाता था मैंने गाड़ी मैंने he was telling a story about how he had this speed race through this Gulbarg की सड़क से I almost had an accident मैंने बड़ी मुश्किल से बचा के किया पुलिस ने जो रोकने की कोशिश की इस तरह के and all the kids are like wow यार this is wow and this friend of mine who was from Bahrain who studied from an American school he says but why and I realized for the first time because all throughout high school, I studied from a Lahore high school. Yeah, this was a very common way of people to show kiya marna, but nobody ever stops somebody says, "Get me kar kyun rahe ho ye?" Right? And that occurred to me as the first time I realized I've never really asked this question, why? And so for the first time in my first semester, and this was my batchmate Khurram, and he was from Bahrain, and so when he asked, and I realized there are lots of things I hear, and I don't really challenge them. And so this was more to do with the kind of people we were around rather than the institute itself. But obviously the institute brought them together, so credit to that. But I really started critically thinking, questioning, challenging things which I previously would have taken at face value. So a lot of my unlearning also began at GIKI thanks to that. And it's very funny, we used to play this game called Medal of Honor. It's a game, and if you start the game, it says challenge everything in the beginning. And that also became like the motto at GIKI. I believe much like any university, the biggest thing a university does is it puts you in with a group of people who you can learn from, either directly or indirectly through osmosis. And so this was one of the key moments I remember where I would question a lot of things which I would previously take for granted. And this continued on for a very long time. And even today, I will say or think about something in a way which is my default setting. And then I realized, wait a minute, I've never really actually thought about why is this my default setting? So that why became very important. So GIK in that sense taught me to question more.
अच्छा ये जो group of people the university puts together or manages to put together, तो उसमें do you think teachers का भी कोई हाथ है? Yani, of course, peers make a lot of difference. Like the kind of people university manages to put together in that space, उसमें teachers भी of course होते हैं ना? So did they also nudge you towards this direction, you think?
I'd say that throughout my life in school as well, I met some really great teachers. And a lot of so I grew up in a religious house. So a lot of my moral foundation came through that. But then in school, I had some really great teachers who also built a really solid moral foundation. And teachers who I can truly say they actually love their students. This is early stages, junior and senior school. That in GIKI, there are a few teachers who were inspirational as well. And you learn from them, but I would say not as much as I'd like, but there were a few. And so the ability for a teacher to capture your attention, not just with the subject matter, but also through the way they make a connection to you is relatively harder and rare, especially so over the new world of Zoom. It's very hard to build a connection over Zoom. But that definitely does play a role. We had a few of those in GIK as well. We worked with alums as well later on in my professional life as well. And I found a lot of people from alums, professors, faculty, researchers, who I also felt that these are people who are very inspiring. And as a matter of fact, it's a very fun story. I live right outside of Lums, and I had recently graduated. And I went with my dad to, there was a shaya, a dinner at the mosques. Well, the Maulvi at the mosque has a quarter over there, and so there was a small dinner over there. This is during Driver Nishtama, and so lots of people were there. And I was sitting there, in this small house, we're just having dinner, and there are these people from Nigeria, for different parts of the world. And मेरे साथ एक मौलवी साहब बैठे हुए हैं, full white, typical, no mustache, दाढ़ी, white, and he says, बेटा आप क्या करते हैं? And me, in my prejudice, मैं सोचता हूँ यार मैं इन मौलवी साहब को क्या बताऊँ? मैंने कहा कि जी मैं JIK में electronics पढ़ रहा हूँ. मैंने कहा अच्छा ये तो मेरे फील्ड से रिलेटेड है. मैंने कहा आप क्या करते हैं? कि जी मैं MIT में मास्टर्स पढ़ाता हूँ और मैं भी यहाँ पे PITP में आ रहा हूँ as the chairman. So this was Dr. Ghani before Dr. Masaf became the PITP's chairman. And I was like, completely unassuming person in that personality. I was so impressed. And he told me, and in that, I think 15 minutes, 20 minutes chat, he told about his friends who were building companies in the valley, selling them, and different stories around that. And I was like, this is amazing. So, and that inspired me a lot. But I think it's hard to become a role model. But I think role models in faculty is hard. But I think something which really does make a huge impact.
अच्छा ये if I can carry on from a related point, I think हमारे कुछ आगे कुछ points से touch करता है कि role of a university, और ये I know it's kind of very very vague किस्म का सवाल है, unfair question, लेकिन ये हम लोग की discussion में ये चीज़ कई दफ़ा ऊपर आई है कि university in general, Pakistani universities, and let's say keeping the CS software engineering focus, but in general वो क्या होना चाहिए है, producing people for the industry, producing good citizens, and some other aspects as well. लेकिन अभी जो आपकी बात से लगा कि the experience of being with peers and kind of almost like growing out or growing into your own person in some ways, भी एक यूनिवर्सिटी के वो 4 साल का शायद वो रोल है, and that is very interesting. I'd like to expand a bit more on that. और उसका रीजन ये भी है कि CS और software engineering side पे there is now this like alternative way of just getting the competencies and skills in a lot less time than 4 years. Online 6 months course, 12-month course kiya, you have the skills and competencies to start working, for example, in your company or other companies like yours. और उससे फिर क्वेश्चन आता है कि ये 4 साल यूनिवर्सिटी में स्पेंड करने के क्या रीजन है, वो सारे पैसे इन्वेस्ट करने के क्या रीजन है. So now this is talking about good universities. एक तो है क्या जो यूनिवर्सिटी अगर अच्छे आउटपुट प्रोड्यूस ही नहीं करी, वो तो एक और कहानी है. So we probably want to go there in a bit as well. But fundamentally, do you think universities have a role to play specifically in the CS, software engineering, IT area? And where do you see them fitting alongside the like non-traditional ways of getting those skills and knowledge? Are they complementary? Are they in competition with each other? What are your thoughts on this?
It's a very large question. It's a little complex and has maybe 4 or 5 aspects to it. And let me see if I can try to answer it by breaking it down. So it depends on what the output is, what the goal is. So for example, as an entrepreneur, we make products, and and the way we know we are successful is anybody buys that product, at what price they buy it, and the cycle begins in that. A lot of problem with education is that the product is the student. You're basically trying to produce a high caliber student. Now, whether or not that student gets a job or not, in many respects is disconnected in largely in most cases. So for example, if a university isn't producing great graduates, or if it produced a few great graduates, the cycle is really long, and the penalty is mostly word of mouth, and it's not as clear. I believe in the US they have a system where there's now a centralized, you can get information on, for example, the university's placement rates within 1 year, within 3 years. What is the average income these graduates earn, which fields do they earn in? So it's not a ranking, but it's just statistics on the alumni. And so using that, you can still make a judgment based upon what is important to you, right? And I think as long as there is this large disconnect, there is going to be a alignment problem between academics and the industry. But that's one aspect of that. And I think any institute can figure that out by just following up with the alumni, figuring out what is your life 1 year after or 3 years after graduation. Where are you right now? And what role did we play? What did we do correctly? What did we do incorrectly? I think that feedback loop is very important. In many places, that feedback loop is broken, I think, without which you really don't know if you're doing right or wrong. In terms of the industrial involvement, there is a value chain. So, for example, the vast amount of Indians companies, and so if you look at the outsource, that's how they start. They start by outsourcing. They start by business process outsourcing. We used to call this BPO. And a very common example of BPO was a call center. Now, to man a phone on a call center does not require a 4-year degree. Let's just say that, right? It requires some training on accent naturalization, neutralization, some communication skill, and some know-how of what the product is that you're selling. And so that's how they start off in India. And so the Wipro, the Satyams, the Infosys, this sort of started off as this business process outsourcing. Eventually, what happened was that as a foundation of that, it started moving up the value chain. So you might start by answering phone calls. You might then start by making calls, making sales calls. Eventually, you might move into quality assurance. You might then become a sales manager who's responsible for quota. Eventually, you might move up into strategy, and eventually, that company or the people working for that company can move up in that way, right? Now, if from an academics perspective, if you talk to companies at the lower end of this value chain, you will get answers like, what should the academics do? You will get these very tool-based answers. Can they use this tool? Can they use Excel? And so that would typically happen. For a long period of time, that's the kind of industry Pakistan had. In most outsourcing cases, we usually have this sort of entry-level requirements. Over time, we've had more software development requirements. But even in that, if you look at how software is developed, there is a whole business side of that. There is a whole product side of that. There's a whole design side of that. Typically, when it comes to software outsourcing in Pakistan or any place where you're starting off, you get the last mile. By that, I mean, even the requirements document has been designed, the specification has been designed, and now you have to conform to a spec. And again, that requires you tool know-how. So for a company that is doing that, what we would ask the academics would be, can you give us engineers who know this particular language? Which is, again, sort of like a very low requirement in that sense. What's happening is that as Pakistanis or any company, they shift from fulfilling a spec to building products where you now have to build out the entire value chain. The level of thinking required goes much, much higher. So the example is, if there is a bank, the bank teller can only do 20 procedures. They can cash your check, they can give you money, they can take money, they can do 20 things. They have a playbook. To teach that playbook does not require very high, like a higher education. You don't need that, right? But to build that playbook, a high-powered team, when they were building out the bank, they wrote that playbook. So the people who build that process first time, they need to have very high level of understanding of the market and a really good understanding of what they're trying to serve and the value they're delivering, right? And so higher education is more aligned now with these higher up the value chain, higher value functions. And so when you ask this question, it's very important to understand who you're asking this question from, right? So if you're talking to a call center who only answers calls, they will not necessarily they might not even require problem-solving skills, right? In that sense. So one of the things what we do is we build products. We build our own product. We have our own brand. We have our own go-to-market. We have our own sales and marketing. We do everything end-to-end, right? And the most important thing we look for is the ability to think critically, and in a way that is brutally honest. This is the most important and a very hard skill to get. And it's very common, especially in a culture like Pakistan, where there's a high penalty for failure. There is a high punishment in case you're wrong. And the other thing in Pakistan is we are a very tamashai spectator sport sort of a culture. So you can see this by all these talk shows, right? काम एक बंदा कर रहा है लेकिन 50 लोग जहाँ से वो तबसरा करने वाले हैं. So it makes the life of the person doing things harder. तो उसका impact ये होता है कि the people they basically start to posture themselves in a way to protect against failure. So as a result, when they do fail, they will not be as honest with the world, but also worse with themselves. And that is the real danger. And so, but this requires a two-way. There's a concept in the corporate world, it's called psychological safety. Where you think if you do a mistake, if you believe your organization has psychological safety, you are willing to share with the team what the mistake was, and with the understanding that this is psychologically safe, they will help you, and the idea is to improve. If the organization punishes you, you will never bring up your mistakes again, right? And by default, Pakistanis are taught not to make mistakes and not to talk about their mistakes. So default setting जो ना हमारी वो थोड़ी सी खराब होती है. So very few people, when we look for these people, we look for a process where we don't penalize on mistakes and you're able to learn from them. Because at the end of the day, if you're doing a product, it's not really been done before, you are going to do mistakes. You have to be honest about those mistakes. You have to learn from this. And what's very funny is this entire process of building startups is just this. And it's basically the scientific method. And it goes all the way back to Ibn Haytham, like the scientific method, the foundation of that, right? Okay, you have an observation, you have an hypothesis, you run the experiment, and then based upon that, you have to be honest. हमने एक आती चीज बना के निकालेंगे, क्या चली कि नहीं चली, क्यों नहीं चली, उसकी वजह क्या थी, उसको iterate कैसे करें. But if you're not honest with yourself, that loop cannot continue. So that's one of the very important things over there. And so your question is whether or not you need higher education or a 4-year program or not. So the answer is, if you're working in the low value aspect of things, if you are doing a call center job, let's say on the early value chain, you don't necessarily need a 4-year degree. I do agree with that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think it's necessary for everybody to do a 4-year degree program if they don't want to do that. They just need to understand what does that mean for them career-wise. You can be a technician, right? Somebody who follows specs. And following specifications, there's nothing wrong with that. Not everybody is meant to be an artist. So if you go all the way up, 4-year degree karte hain, you are now entering into the realm of creation and original thought. Not every institute needs that. Pakistan is still very nascent. It's not creating a lot of things. So उस तरह की value भी जो है ना पाकिस्तान में, इस तरह लोगों की value कम है. People who can create things, where would they go and fit? There are relatively few places where they can go to do that. But eventually, for us to enter into the 21st century and to be productive, we need a lot more creators, a lot more artists in that sense, right? Is say the nature of education changes, and I have thoughts about what I feel a modern university or should do. For example, you mentioned the people around you, peers around you. I'll give you a quick summary on this. My son, I was teaching him maths, my oldest son, and this is I was teaching in 5th grade maths, right? There's something known as the 2 Sigma problem, also known as mastery education. And so what this is for viewers, the mastery education system is you teach a kid a concept. Unless they master the concept, you do not let them proceed to the next concept. Yeah. So for example, let's say you're teaching Cartesian coordinates. This is what the dot is on XY plane. If they don't understand that concept, and then you skip and you go to the concept of a line, which is a further builds on top of that, and then a plane. A student who misses that lecture or who did not understand that, their entire foundation is it. Yes. They will now say, mujhe math nahi aati. And the reason they say mujhe math nahi aati is because they have missed some kind of a foundational thing. So mastery learning is कि unless the student masters a concept, you don't go forward. Even if they get a 95% score, the question is, 5% वो issue क्या है जिसकी वजह से you don't understand the coordinate system क्या है? Because a 5% in that foundation, and then a 5% in the next one, they compound. They become 5 times 5, they become 25, right? So in a school system, in a lecture setting, every student gets the same information at the same time. And it's like a one-to-many broadcast thing. So there were tools like Khan Academy. It's a not-for-profit. Anybody can use that. They have mastery education built into their maths curriculum. So that meant was that they had grade 5th curriculum, but उन्होंने ये recommend किया कि आप grade 5 से शुरू ना करें. आप जाएं हमारे grade 1 पे, बल्कि pre-nursery में जाएं. उसके basically they have assessments for each class. So my son, I took him to the 1st grade nursery. He obviously passed it through blazing. मेरा ख्याल था एक दिन में सारा कुछ कर लेंगे. We'll start grade 5 on the same day. तो हमने पहली क्लास की it took 10 minutes. Second class को आधा घंटा लग गया. Third class को घंटा 2 घंटे लगे. 4th class में मसले आना शुरू हुए. जो number line में जो negative numbers थे वहाँ पे we found holes in his understanding over there. And then उससे related जो concepts थे adding these numbers to negative positive वहाँ पे segregation आना शुरू हो गया. And so what Khan Academy does is कि वो आपको शुरू में एक assessment देता है, आप उसको करते हैं, which is like the end of class या end of unit एक quiz होता है. If you fail on any question, it actually specifically tells you कि आप इन units को पढ़ें, ये videos आप देखें. आप उसको इनको पढ़ते हैं, फिर आप दोबारा टेस्ट देते हैं. Great thing about Khan Academy के it is algorithmic, so it will generate as many questions as you want for the topic. So number line it will generate a unique question every single time, right? And thankfully now with AI you can do this with yourself. आपको इसकी भी ज़रूरत नहीं. You can take any course, you can generate any number of questions for yourself as well. But anyway, उसका फायदा होता है कि this one-on-one attention. So the two sigma problems इसलिए कहते हैं because what it's shown in multiple double-blind studies is कि students who are taught in this method perform by 2 grade points better, but not two grade deviations, 2 sigma better than that class. So the average is
in the normal curve.
These kids get in the bilkul. So they'll be like, A minus, for example, is kind of something like that. So compared to a B or something. So this has been proven multiple times. Now, in the current way the education system is designed, students को individualized attention नहीं दे पाते. And so as a result, a student जो disengage हो चुका आपसे because what you're teaching him is really now above him because he might have missed something or he might either उस lecture में नहीं आया था या उस lecture की समझ नहीं आई थी या उस lecture की जो prerequisites थे वो उसका कच्चा था, right? So he was never able to catch on. And instead, they tell themselves, because आपको rationalize करना पड़ता है कि मेरी यूनिवर्सिटी में आकर मुझे समझ आ रही मुझ में क्या इशू है, then you end up saying कि जी मुझसे मैथ नहीं होती, मुझसे प्रोग्रामिंग नहीं होती. And the reason I say कि जी I'm very much on the nurture side of this equation is because I don't believe in this elitist gatekeeping कि जी हाँ प्रोग्रामिंग सिर्फ कुछ लोग ही कर सकते हैं, कुछ लोग नहीं कर सकते. As a matter of fact, Bill Gates has famously said that only 5% people in the world should ever program. Not everybody should program. And I vehemently disagree with that. Anybody can be taught anything. There is absolutely no reason why somebody cannot become the very best in something. It's just a question about their interest and finding, talking to them in a way that they understand. And so I'm a big believer in that. So in my view, in terms of university, during COVID हुआ क्या कि these universities professors would now teach, will make a recording of the lecture and then they would put it online. But the thing is कि अगर आप let's say electricity का concept पढ़ा रहे हैं, current कैसे काम करता है, whatever video you make, you cannot compete with the best YouTube video on this topic, which was made by a production studio with the budget and all of that. आप तो compete कर नहीं सकते. So my point of view is कि a university in the modern world should use mastery learning. उसमें there are tools now. इसको LMS बोलते हैं, learning management systems, इनके अंदर ये quizzes built in आते हैं. They can now have हर student के ऊपर assessments होती हैं उनके पास. They can then recommend कि जी हमने course curriculum, हमने online different test records, हमने open course लिया, हमने MIT का उठाया. These are the best lectures on that. Classroom के अंदर we will discuss, we will help you. So ये हमने lecture देख लिया है, हमने बेशक online देखा है, चाहे class में online देखा है. We will now go through 20 problems related to this lecture. And any student who has an issue, we'll make these groups of 5, for example. Those kids will teach themselves as well because we want this to scale. But अगर उनको एक group का समझ नहीं आता, the group comes to you and the teacher helps facilitate that. But I think that's how a university might work better. You use the world's best content, you then use your peers, and then you help them in actual problem solving. That I feel is a modern approach. But I was in the US at my sister's place, and a really fantastic faculty. It's a private school, so it's a very they have high quality faculty over there. All her kids were in the 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, but the school uses Khan Academy as part of the curriculum. So आपने जो पढ़ाना है उसमें assessments की test करना है, and that's how the model is as well. Khan Academy कि आप use करें. It's for teachers के लिए अलग बकायदा login है. Teachers can track students' progress. उनके लिए पूरा dashboard है उनके backend पे. You can design course outlines. So you can do all of that, right? And it's all the way up to high school. So I think that's I think a combination of where the modern world will go into. So this was a very long answer because the question was rather complicated, but that's my view.
I think there are a lot of brilliant points there. Like just not a question, but just adding on there are websites like Lead Code, you might have come across it, and other such websites which are meant to be basically for people applying for software engineering jobs. लेकिन it sounds a lot like जो आप mastery based learning कह रहे हो ना कि you go there, you are given a problem, a coding problem, you solve it, and वो फिर उसके आपको ये भी बताता है कि कितना efficient solution आपका वो big complexity wise, and कितने % लोगों से आपने बेहतर solution है आपका, and then you have multiple attempts to do this. Or it's really interesting you mentioned mastery based learning, because यहाँ पे पिछले 2-3 साल से as part of discussion in the podcast and मेरे job role maybe I had to do some courses on pedagogies, or there is a similar term, I don't know if they are the same or they are similar, it's called a competency based learning. And it is effectively what you are saying, that you aim for a competency and that you test by, for example, sitting in an assessment, but you kind of keep going at it until you have achieved competency at that level. And then you go on, rather than a one-time exam where you get a certain grade, and if you kind of pass, you move on, and you might have that all behind you. Or usme exactly what you're saying, ke being able to keep going at an assessment again and again until you get to a certain point. That is kind of in a way crucial to that.
And towards that, and sorry, cut me off, but I've always found this very strange. My view is that university's job should be to educate you. But in many times, I see that universities अपना काम education का नहीं लेती, वो assessment का लेना शुरू होती हैं. तो मिसाल के तौर पे आपने midterm exam लिया, किसी student ने fail किया, why shouldn't a student be allowed to take the midterm as many times as they can? Because if they're improving their grade, right, तो ये तो अच्छी चीज है, उनको दोबारा लेने दें as many times as you want. There is a time frame, obviously, semester है उसके अंदर आपने करना है, but हम वो allow नहीं करते typically, right? We don't allow anything like that. We don't allow you to resubmit a homework assignment. Now there is obviously logistic issues के student एक teacher कितनी दफा चीजें check कर सकता है, but I'm hoping कि all of this goes away with the advent of AI. AI can check assignments on your behalf. They can do things on their behalf, and as long as the student now understands कि look आपने ये assessment pass नहीं करना, there's no penalty. I think वहाँ पे जाना to find shortcuts, even to cheat, I think उसकी incentives कम हो जाते हैं कि this is just an assessment for you. इसको आप if you fail, it's completely fine. And so just like LMS आपको बताता है कि आपके इसमें कम है, these are some of the concepts you need to go through. And so उसको करके दोबारा try करें. I feel that there has to be a shift away from assessment based to more like imparting education.
You say just an anecdote to complement what you were saying कि मैं यहाँ पे course पढ़ा रहा था which is a non-credit course. So although यहाँ पे compared to Pakistani universities मेरे पास ज़्यादा flexibility है अपनी assessment में creative होने की, लेकिन because I was non-assessed, they were like no pressure there at all. Like I could do whatever I wanted to. And what I did there was I just kind of basically an online quiz, and the question was picked from a pool. Pool was not extremely large, but it was large enough that multiple attempts में कोई different सवाल आ रहे हैं. और me that you just keep doing it until you get to a certain level, and then you move on. And I was just talking to a colleague who was a pedagogy expert. और मैंने इसको बोला incidentally mention किया, उसने बोला this is exactly what the literature will tell you is the best way to learn. And for me, it was ironically I could do it because it was not a regular credited course where there is peers who are looking at your exam scripts to say whether they're okay or not. I knew I'd have to jump through a lot more hoops to get something like this passed through the as a proper exam. I could maybe over here. Pakistan में शायद almost impossible हो जाए, PC नाराज होगी, HEC नाराज होगी. But nevertheless, not having the pressure कि ये graded course है, I think able to do better than in my regular courses, which are my main job, where I have to put, जो crucial courses हैं हमारे.
I think even if the final exam is graded, it's done the way it is. But up until that point, allow the students to make as many mistakes as they can, reduce the penalty for mistakes, allow them to retake things again and again, submit assignments again. Because up until that point, there has to be eventually an assessment job, but that becomes the main focus. And I feel that discourages many students from actually, obviously from failure. You again penalizing failure, and usse you push students away in that sense.
अच्छा, मुझे तो लगता है कि खान अकेडमी में भी you mentioned के assessments based है, but वो mastery की तरफ push करते हैं ना. And ironically, you did mention के universities, it seems के assessment focused हो गए. So of course, but assessments done the right way, it seems, is our resolution.
Hmm.
यानी कि
I guess
assessments not just for the sake of assessment, just like checklist के लिए universities are doing, but assessments ताकि वो students को personalized यानी उनकी learning journey को fulfill कर सके ना.
बिल्कुल. मतलब I guess imagine if you're only allowed to take the Khan Academy test for something only once. और जो ग्रेड आप पे आएगा वो आप पे तोहमत है जिंदगी भर के लिए. ये जी मेरा मैथ का ग्रेड है और ये मेरी ट्रांसक्रिप्ट में इंक्लूड हो गया है, बस मैं ये काला धब्बा है, बस वो कलंकती का लग चुका है बस, राइट. So it's basically removing the penalty from there, and so I guess better wording की जरूरत है, but I guess we can so universities typically focus on not necessarily increasing the upper bar, they focus on raising the floor. कि minimum student अगर हमारी जगह से आता है वो इतना अच्छा होगा. And I think the focus should be assess आपने आखिर में करना है, but you want to उस assessment के result क्या है, उसका consequence क्या है? Is it like a permanent one-way door, or is it like a two-way door? इसमें वापस आके दोबारा आप try कर सकते हैं, right? So I want to reduce, at least I would love to see to reduction of penalty associated with an assessment.
I think मुझे जो एक common मतलब recurring यहाँ पे एक note भी है हमारी conversation में, आपने scientific method को mention किए and you tied it up with entrepreneurship के उसमें भी exactly क्योंकि तो it's like an experiment, right? So I think one thing universities should learn is how to be more entrepreneurial about their businesses. I think they've stopped experimenting. और अगर वो इसी पे experiment कर देंगे students को learn करने के लिए what should be the next hypothesis we should explore instead of just ये standardization के ऊपर fixate हो जाना और फिर PECs, HECs, तो maybe बहुत सारी नई चीजें सामने आ सके.
बिल्कुल, and it's not just being entrepreneurial. I think entrepreneurialism, what it does is it supercharges, puts it on steroids, this whole idea of the scientific method. And where there's a penalty as well, because you have a limited amount of resources and funds, so there are only a number of cycles you can do. So if you're wrong, it will take you, the next experiment might take another month, and now you're running out of resources and money and time. So a university is a safe time where you're experimenting and you're sort of trying out different things that you may like, you may not like. So I definitely think a protected environment like a university really helps you stretch the limits of what is possible and should. So there is this artificial penalty in डाली ना कि वो mid गलत हो गया तो उसकी है. So I think if we elevate that, तो but I agree कि it is that. And this is everywhere. So for example, in countries which work well democratically speaking, उसके अंदर कोई हादसा होता है. For example, UK में एक मशहूर हुआ था कि there was a school shooting. It became a huge national conversation. And in response to that conversation, there was legislation passed against guns. And so that is the same method that you're seeing applied at a national level, right? It can go all the way up to that. It can go all the way up to your level. कि आप एक दिन शीशे के सामने खड़े होकर कहते हैं यार मैंने वजन put on कर लिया, इसकी वजह क्या है, मुझे शायद जिम जाना चाहिए. So that's again that scientific method applied to your, it's the feedback loop, right? So even if you don't have a very entrepreneurial aspect to university, but just having a feedback loop which works is very important. Even if that's just asking students, did you शुरू में क्या थे, बाद में क्या थे, did you learn from this course, इसमें benefit आपको मिला कि नहीं, things like that. Whatever that is, whatever those questions are, but I think those feedback loops, the way to iterate, that entrepreneurs are very good at iterating. So I think that aspect everybody can benefit from.
Yeah, non
मैं इसी से एक्चुअली रिलेटेड यूनिवर्सिटीज इस तरह से डिजाइन हैं क्यों ना, एक वो बहुत पुराना सा एक सेटअप चला हुआ है, ट्रेडिशनल वही चल रहा है. उस वक्त के शायद इश्यूज और थे, और अब हमारे पास पाकिस्तान में रियल चैलेंज है कि हमारे पास इतनी ज्यादा यंग पॉपुलेशन है जिसको हमने एजुकेशन देनी है. तो एक रियल रिक्वायरमेंट आ जाती है स्केलिंग की ना, कि आपने इस सेटअप को स्केल करना है. और ये जो आप जो बता रहे हैं तरीका, ये खान अकेडमी वाले सेटअप में या एक स्मॉल सेटअप में तो पॉसिबल लगता है, अदरवाइज विद ह्यूमन इन्वॉल्वमेंट ये पॉसिबल नहीं लगता. तो वी नीड टू रीडिजाइन द रोल ऑफ द टीचर एंड मेनी other people involved. Maybe you need some kind of content creators, producers, और इस तरह के सॉफ्टवेयर
बिल्कुल।
मेकर्स या जो भी है ना. तो वो जुनेद वाली जो बात कर रहा था मैं, में शायद उसका एक एंगल ये था कि हमें इस तरीके से शायद यूनिवर्सिटी को रीडिजाइन करने की जरूरत है. लेकिन क्योंकि जेन्युइन प्रॉब्लम ये है, हम इसे स्केल कैसे करें इतने लोगों के लिए ना.
I think scaling is now very easy. आज से 50 साल पहले तो I would say कि without individualized human attention, one-on-one, ये scale ना होता. अब आपके पास like जो LMS है वो आपने student की automatically उसने assessment करके दे दी. आप पूरी class को दें, you can within the assessment you can figure out where does everybody stand. उसके अंदर you can even group them into these are students जिन्होंने let's say bottom 20 percentile पे थे. They need special attention, whatever. यहाँ पे and even in that case आप course curriculum भी generate कर सकते हैं in a way कि it's for example even personalized down to that individual. इस पे भी अब तक human intervention की जरूरत नहीं आई. जहाँ पे I think human intervention या वहाँ पे where you need जहाँ पे scaling का आपका सवाल ज़्यादा आता है. I think that idea कि then you create these groups in peers who are at the same level of understanding as you. उनको cluster आपने इस तरह किया and when you give them problem you basically give it to them in a way कि you're available to help them troubleshoot. And that's where they can help themselves. They can also escalate to you. But कुछ हद तक scaling वहाँ पे फिर भी possible हो जाती है. Also, I think institutes like education institutes should partner with other commercial companies which create content. जिनका काम ये professionally produce करना है, चाहे पाकिस्तान में चाहे abroad है. And there are many universities जो अपना सारा कुछ open source भी करती हैं, वो भी useful है. अभी YouTube ने किया recently. YouTube has phenomenal education content. बट वो लोकलाइज नहीं. अभी रिसेंटली इंट्रोड्यूस किया दिसबिलिटी कि आप किसी भी यूट्यूब के ऊपर आप उसका ऑडियो ट्रैक चेंज कर सकते हैं. तो इमेजिन वाचिंग अ वीडियो व्हिच वाज इन इंग्लिश बट यू कैन चेंज इट टू उर्दू एंड यू कैन लिसन. ये अभी तक ह्यूमन पावर्ड है बट इवेंचुअली एआई विल आल्सो बी एबल टू ट्रांसलेट दैट उस तरह करके है. तो आई थिंक स्केलिंग इन टुडेज वर्ल्ड यूजिंग द राइट टेक्नोलॉजी इज वेरी पॉसिबल. द अदर थिंग इज के चले खान एकेडमी हैज पुट इन लॉट ऑफ एफर्ट बट यू कैन आल्सो repurpose that, but also you can use AI to generate questions as many variations as you'd like. And you can also use AI to assess those questions as well. Chahe wo subjective hai, chahe wo objective hai. You can do it in both ways. And you can also scale in that sense as well. So I think there are very few, at least for a class of 50, 100, 200, I think a single teacher should be able to implement mastery learning. Isme kuch backend ka kaam chahiye aapko, but I feel it's doable.
उसमें जो इम्पोर्टेंट चीज है, जैसे खान एकेडमी ने वर्कआउट किया, फॉर एग्जांपल आप मैथ्स की जो एग्जांपल दे रहे थे, तो उन्होंने वर्कआउट किया हुआ है कि वो कौन से राइट कंटेंट है, किस लेवल पे है और किस तरह से उसको कंस्ट्रक्ट करना है कि आप इस लेवल ऑफ मास्टरी तक पहुंचोगे ना. तो अभी हमारी यूनिवर्सिटीज में स्पेशली अगर मैं देखूं तो शायद कुछ सब्जेक्ट्स में तो ये आसान हो या पॉसिबल हो. बाकी में जब तक हम वही टीचर का रोल चेंज रीडिफाइन करने वाली बात कि आपको कुछ कंटेंट क्रिएटर चाहिए जो बैठ के ये सोचेंगे एक्चुअली कि मुझे ये किस किस्म का कौन से वो फाउंडेशन स्टोन्स हैं, माइलस्टोन्स कौन से आएंगे, मैं इस मास्टरी लेवल को मैंने अचीव किया.
बिल्कुल जी, बिल्कुल. इसको एपिस्टेमोलॉजी, द स्टडी ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन एंड नॉलेज के डोमेन में आता है. और उसके अंदर ये जो नॉलेज ग्राफ है ना कि हायरार्की क्या बनती है, दिस इज लाइक अ ट्री सा बनता है. और इसके अंदर ये खान एकेडमी ने इसको ओपन सोर्स किया. उस मिसाल के तौर पे इन ऑर्डर टू इकॉन 101 it will actually expand the tree. इसको समझने के लिए आपको ये कॉन्सेप्ट पता होना चाहिए और उस कॉन्सेप्ट पे ये there's a famous method known as the Richard Feynman method of teaching understanding. And the idea is कि आप कोई भी कॉन्सेप्ट लेते हैं, you have to rewrite that concept or explain that concept with essentially no word harder to understand for a fifth grader. Or तो उसमें essentially what you're doing is you're breaking down these bigger terms into their substitute easier parts. तो सेम कहानी यहाँ पे. अगर आपने एक जुमला बोला कि जी सस्टेनेबल एनर्जी सोर्सेज आर दोज व्हिच आर रिन्यूएबल, ये जुमला आपने काफी बड़ा बोला. अब ये क्या ना फर्स्ट ग्रेडर अंडरस्टैंड दिस जुमला? नहीं, बिकॉज सस्टेनेबल क्या है, रिन्यूएबल क्या है, नहीं पता. तो इसमें कुछ ओपन सोर्स इस तरह की चीजें अवेलेबल हैं. कुछ आपको अपने स्पेसिफिक टू योर सब्जेक्ट भी करनी पड़ेंगी, बट इस पे आई थिंक ओपन कॉर्पस काफी अवेलेबल है. तो दिस इज मोर अराउंड करिकुलम डिजाइन. जो कंटेंट की बात करें ना, कंटेंट क्रिएशन, आई फील के दैट a lot of that is now available. आप किसी भी सब्जेक्ट का, like for example, I was teaching my son a mathematical concept, different things के around. तो जो खान अकेडमी की वीडियो थी वो it also felt not that easy to understand. Same concept को हमने YouTube पे गूगल किया तो we found 20 videos including some guy in India teaching in Urdu से लेके a fully animated video made by a production house. तो we also कह रहा था कि my biggest important thing for me as a parent is to teach basically to teach my kids how to learn on their own. And our children know this intuitively. So my children play Minecraft a lot. That's one of their favorite games. And Minecraft is like virtual Lego, and it's very complicated. You build, basically the game is to build. There is no other. Literally, the game is construction. And the way that my kids learn is that they will watch YouTube videos of creators who make learning fun. They will basically entertain while playing, while explaining a character. And similarly, they'll consume a lot of videos around that. They will learn a lot of those things in that way. And so, same methodology, सब बच्चे games सीखते हैं. You can do it. Things are moving towards.
Wait, I did put some iron in this
Very
but I put some iron in
Oh.
the floor.
ये sorry,
इसी को कंटिन्यू करना है वरना इस जो नसरुल्लाह पहले बोल रहे थे ना जो शुरू में मतलब थोड़ा सा इस आपके जो बड़ा सारा एक आंसर था ना उसमें से एक और डायमेंशन को मैं पिक करना चाह रहा था. अगर आप इसको कंटिन्यू करना चाह रहे तो आप कंटिन्यू करो.
नहीं करो go ahead.
अच्छा, आपने जो बोला था ना कि अगर आप किसी प्रोडक्ट बनाने वाली कंपनी से पूछोगे तो वो आपको और तरह का स्किल सेट बताएंगे कि ये चाहिए. इसमें एक जो बड़ी इंपॉर्टेंट चीज आ जाती है कि वो चॉइस ऑफ द प्रोडक्ट क्या है जो अपने प्रोडक्ट बनानी है, जो आगे जाके आप फोर्सी कर रहे हो कि ये हिट हो जाएगी और उसकी ये राइट ऑडियंस है जिसको मैंने टारगेट करना है, जो भी है. तो ये चॉइस ऑफ द प्रोडक्ट जो है, ये स्किल जो है, ये यूनिवर्सिटी एक्चुअली अगर मैं आपसे पूछूंगा, आप गाइड करना चाहें यूनिवर्सिटीज को या टीचर्स को, अगर वो इस तरह की एजुकेशन पे काम कर रहे हैं तो वो कैसे ये स्किल स्टूडेंट्स में कैसे इम्पार्ट की जाए?
By choice of product, do you mean what kind of product to create to go to market? Yeah, did you mean that as an analogy?
एक स्टूडेंट है, वो एंटरप्रेन्योर, उसका माइंडसेट है, वो आगे बढ़ना चाहता है, ये काम करना चाहता है, लेकिन उसके पास बहुत सारी टेक्निकल स्किल्स भी हैं, बाकी स्किल्स भी हैं जिनसे वो बना सकता है प्रोडक्ट, लेकिन उसको कहीं ना कहीं मार्केट का एनालिसिस भी करना है कि मुझे कौन सी प्रोडक्ट बैंक करना है, वो जो उसने पिक करनी है मार्केट, वो कौन सी प्रोडक्ट होगी. अब ये उसका माइंडसेट आप पहले डेवलप करेंगे, कुछ सोचेगा वो, तो ये माइंडसेट कैसे डेवलप किया जा सकता है?
बिल्कुल ठीक है. When I talk to young entrepreneurs, या budding या would-be entrepreneurs, a lot of them come with an idea कि जी मेरे पास फला idea है which I want to create, I want to monetize, I want to build a company around. And typically that is not a good approach. You should not start with an idea. Typically what you want to do is you want to start with a problem. So मिसाल के तौर पे लोगों को there's a problem of pick and drop, for example, right? You face this problem yourself. आप ऑफिस जाना चाहते हैं, गाड़ी एक है, 3 लोग हैं घर पे, different जगह पे जाना है. If you create a fractional car sharing service, इस तरह Uber है, ये Cream है, that's sort of the idea to solve the problem. If you build that product, all the people who you know who have this problem will benefit from your solution, right? But if you start the other way around, if you didn't, अगर आपको एक idea आता है which you latch onto, if you create the solution for that, it will become a solution looking for a problem. Now you have to find कि अच्छा ये जो चीज़ मैंने बनाई है, इससे फायदा किसको है? फिर आप लोग ढूंढेंगे उनको मसला है कि नहीं. So you're basically starting 3 steps back. So the first thing is कि you want to start with the problem. The second recommendation is कि you want to start with the problem that you have faced yourself. इसके बहुत सारे benefits ये होते हैं कि you're able to short circuit validation. And when you see the solution, you yourself are able to assess whether this is the solution. You can also do it with third parties. उनसे भी पूछ सकते हैं, but that requires a higher level of skill to be able to validate. इस process को जो किया है काफी अच्छा document is by Professor Dr. Steve Blank. It is known as the Customer Development Methodology, and he lays out a very simple 4-stage process in how do you do this. So customer discovery, कैसे करते हैं आपने customer वैलिडेशन कैसे करते हैं. So this whole process is known as customer development. उसका जो एक पॉप वर्जन है उसको हम बोलते हैं MVP, minimal viable product. So that is also popular as well, which you can see as well. But that's sort of the other thing that you can do. But that's sort of the idea.
तो अच्छा मैं अगर I think connects reasonably well to what you were discussing, and I think moves us kind of to the next point as well. हम ये बात थोड़ी सी कर चुके हैं, लेकिन हमारी फर्स्टली हमारा स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट भी ये एक कंसर्न या कंसिडरेशन थी. एनेक्डोटली हमें लगता था कि यूनिवर्सिटीज विद अ फ्यू एक्सेप्शंस ग्रेजुएट्स प्रोड्यूस कर रही हैं जो कि मार्केट में जो एक्सपेक्टेशन है वो मीट नहीं कर रही. ठीक है, let's say, and again, we can focus more on CS software engineering, and that is our primary topic anyway, but we can make it more generic as well. Or on the other side, there were industries, startups, tech industries who were looking for skill but not finding it. So we had this situation of graduates looking for jobs but not being competent enough, and industry looking for people and not finding enough people. Or some universities were doing a better job, but a lot of them weren't. तो ये जो गैप है बिटवीन सॉफ्टवेयर इंजीनियरिंग इंडस्ट्री रिक्वायरमेंट और यूनिवर्सिटी जो प्रोड्यूस कर रही है हमारी, ये आपके नजदीक एक तो है कि नहीं, डू यू थिंक, और अगर है तो क्यों? तो आई कनेक्टेड टू व्हाट यू थिंक अबाउट मास्टरी बेस्ड लर्निंग टू कंप्लीट माय क्वेश्चन के इन अ वे वी हैव एड्रेस्ड दैट क्वेश्चन इन सम वेज, लेकिन जो यूनिवर्सिटीज हैं जो कि विदाउट यूजिंग दिस मास्टरी बेस्ड पेडागोजी दे वर स्टिल प्रोड्यूसिंग ग्रेजुएट्स हु आर डूइंग वेल इन द ट्रेडिशनल वे. तो ऐसा नहीं कि वो सिस्टम फेल कर रहा था. Some universities have been producing good graduates in that system too. तो वो क्या रीजन है? एक तो आपके ख्याल से इट इज ट्रू कि a lot of Pakistani universities are not even giving the competencies and knowledge that should be possible in a traditional system, and if so, why do you think that might be the case?
I think it goes back to the value chain question. Okay, so even at a software company, they're like these, if you hypothetically break it down to these three levels. एक आपको, let's say, you need an engineer who can just follow the specification. कोई algo बनाने की जरूरत नहीं है, आपको specification दी, आपने बस उसको implement करना है. That, let's say, is the beginning entry level thing, right? फिर एक mid level है जहाँ पे आपको well defined scope problem दिया गया है, आपने उसके अंदर रहते हुए उसका component design करना है. And then let's say there's the highest level where you have to design the architecture, figure out the technology to use. It's like the highest level of thinking and experience required, right? Now, universities do a fairly good job of the first level. They will also do a decent job with the mid level as well in some cases. They don't do a very good job of the highest level. There are not enough companies that require this highest level up until recently. कि पिछले 2-3 साल से रिवाज बना है प्रोडक्ट कंपनीज का, स्टार्टअप्स का. उससे पहले पाकिस्तान में प्रोडक्ट्स कौन बनाता था? Who would need to do this, right? तो उसकी डिमांड भी नहीं थी. तो एक तो there was a huge vacuum over there. अब जो ज्यादातर कंप्लेंट्स आप सुनते हैं are for people who want to do this third thing on top, and they're looking for people to do that. उसका फिर आपको एक्सपीरियंस नहीं मिलता, because you can have 10 years of experience of being an outsourced engineer who's just following spec. 10 साल का होगा. But as soon as I ask you to create a solution from scratch, you would certainly not have that skill set. You don't have the technological, the architectural, the solution experience which is required for that. And so एक तो वहाँ पे एक gap था. So now recently अगर industry ने मांगना शुरू किया है, that is a good thing. Academics will take some time to catch up to that. Now in theory you can say कि या तो मैं पहले से produce करना चाहिए था, that is what they would be doing. But वो जो लोग हैं who are actually good at that tier, they look at Pakistan को jobs मिलती है, so there is a direct brain drain at that point. So पाकिस्तान पीछे रहने वाले लोग जो उस tier को match करते हैं वो relatively कम भी रहे हैं. अभी recently startups पे ये हुआ है कि because they're not paying enough, they've been able to either keep those people within Pakistan, कि बाहर जाने की जरूरत नहीं है, paying you enough here, या फिर they've even brought a few people back to Pakistan. There was a term coined by Atif, Pakistani of sorts, के वापस आ रहे हैं, right?
Yes.
तो उस पे ये भी एक इस पे एस्पेक्ट है. So I think it sort of depends कि आप उसको किस तरह. The other aspect is कि a lot of my CEO friends कोई complain कर रहा था कि यार हमें अच्छे engineers पाकिस्तान में नहीं मिलते. And I push back and say, अच्छा, when you say अच्छा engineer नहीं मिलता, तो compared to what? Compared to the Silicon Valley? तो आप तो उस बंदे को साल का, let's say you paying him $20,000. That जो आप quality expect करें वैली में, यही बंदा वो 2 लाख कमा रहा होगा, right? $2 lakh. So you're also not paying him Silicon Valley, right? So अगर he's able to earn, if he's really, let's say if the engineer is really good, कि वो Silicon Valley से compete कर सकता है, so A, why would he stay in Pakistan and earn 1/10 of his potential or her potential? And B, why, or remotely उनके लिए काम करे? So there's this other aspect of this as well. कि local companies up until a few years ago would not also pay for that level of thinking and risk taking. अब वो कुछ match होना शुरू with the funding coming in. So I think it's a bit of a complex problem. Even if you produce really high caliber graduates, you recognize that you are basically creating a product purely for export. If they get lucky, they might find a job in Pakistan in that to match that skill set, but mostly, and Pakistan has done a tremendous job of producing high quality export products for other university institutes and education. So वो हम कर रहे हैं. The question is कि वो यहाँ पे ठहरते हैं कि नहीं ठहरते. Look at the entire graduating batch of LUMS, GIKI. Look at it 10 years later. Less than 5% are staying back. And most of them stay back is for familial reasons. कि जी family की वजह थी, कुछ तभी चीज थी. But it's not out of choice. Given the choice, given an hour of work of your life, and given that different places will give you एक गांव में काम करने की आपको तनख्वाह कितनी मिलनी है, एक शहर में काम करके उसी घंटे की तनख्वाह कितनी मिलनी है, वही तनख्वाह आपको यूरोप में कितनी मिलनी है, वही तनख्वाह अमेरिका में कितनी मिलनी है. तो everybody would galvanate towards the place which pays you the most, right? So I think it's a question around industry as well as the institutes, but I feel this is more of a industry opportunity problem right now if it comes to Pakistan.
वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग. बिकॉज यूजुअली हमारी जब बात इंडस्ट्री के लोगों से होती है तो उसमें यूनिवर्सिटीज डोंट कम आउट लुकिंग वेरी गुड, टू बी ऑनेस्ट. काफी क्रिटिसिज्म होती है और आई थिंक अ लॉट ऑफ इज probably well deserved as well. Lekin it's interesting. I think you are painting a more nuanced picture there, which is I think in general normally इतना complex situation के easy answers होते भी नहीं हैं. Normally have more complex answers.
Yeah, from the industry, I hear my CEO friends as well, so I like to hold them to account as well when it comes to this question.
नहीं, बड़ा रिफ्रेशिंग है और बड़ा ग्राउंडेड एनालिसिस है, तो एक तो थैंक यू फॉर दैट फर्स्टली. अब अगर हम थोड़ा सा, क्योंकि आपने ये मेंशन किया था कि आपकी डेव साइड इंजीनियरिंग टीम मोस्टली पाकिस्तान में प्लेस्ड है ना, तो आई डोंट नो उसकी रीजन वो चीप लेबर है या इज इट बिकॉज यू थिंक कि आपको उसी लेवल के इंजीनियर्स यहाँ पे बैठे हुए मिल रहे हैं जो आपको में भी बे एरिया में भी मिल सकते थे? एक तो आप ये भी क्लैरिफाई कर दें.
So it started from Pakistan because I was in Pakistan or शुरू हुई सी बात है. It was more of an organic reason. But I would say कि हमने, because we're building our own product, हमने काफी मेहनत की अपनी product बनाने के अंदर. It took us a really long amount of time because Pakistan में we did not have people who had been there, done that. उनका experience नहीं था उसके अंदर. And so it took us longer. It was harder for us to do. We went through several iterations. Eventually, we had to then find and hire people in the valley. So our head of product and design is someone from the valley. He is from LUMS. He's Pakistani from the background, but he went to Berkeley. He worked in the valley, and he's sort of there. इसी तरह go-to-market side पे with people who have worked in Microsoft, who worked in Google. So वो हमें करना पड़ा is because के वो scar tissue नहीं है. Sorry, my kids are here as well. So वो scar tissue नहीं है वहाँ पे उनके पास. They don't have the experience to show that. Now, जो हम बात करते हैं ना scientific method की. Now, यहाँ पे वो कहानी आती है कि here there's a real penalty of getting it wrong. If you build the product which is wrong, it will take you 6 months to really build it out and go to market. And if it's wrong, उसकी iteration cost is very high, right? Depending upon how wrong you were. So you want to make sure that you hire the very best people. So Certain types of people we found in Pakistan, certain types we have not found in Pakistan. Similarly, I think marketing ki agar baat karte hain for SaaS software companies, you won't really find very good high quality people who have experienced selling to the Western world. तो आपको नहीं कम मिलेंगे इसके अंदर. This is not always true. Motive is a very large company in Pakistan, which is going to an IPO. They have a 500-man outbound sales company in Islamabad, right? And they literally sell to truckers. वो literally call करते हैं, अमेरिकी trucker को call करते हैं. So वहाँ पे this has been done over there. उसकी cost बहुत ज़्यादा होती है. It takes a longer time to do that. But उनकी भी जो leadership है या management है, वो जो 3 levels की बात हो रही है ना, level 1 जो है ना उनका, वो फिर भी अमेरिका में बैठा हुआ है. It's like skilled people. तो निचला level 2 फिर level 3 पाकिस्तान में हो जाता है, right? There are some exceptions, and I think we've been lucky as well in this case. We have found some really good product engineers who've been able to sort of fill that role, but it is much bigger challenge. There is definitely a cost benefit to Pakistan, especially in a company like ours, where we connect to other systems. So, and there are thousands of systems to connect to. So this is basically a game of the number of hours you can throw at this. So a company like this could not have existed in San Francisco. What's funny is that now जब AI आई है, this process of building connectors is now an AI-driven aspect. We're recently doing this work. A lot of that human work is now being replaced with AI, and the humans that were doing this before sort of become supervisors of AI. So now the bottom tier is there's a new level added, which is the AI layer at the bottom. So the same employee is now 10 times more productive. They're able to do more, and they're able to use AI in that. We, as a policy, we directly pay in dollars in Pakistan for that very reason. What happened was in the beginning of 2022, there was a very rapid decline in the dollar value exchange rate in Pakistan. And what we decided was we were shifting the employees to dollar value ताकि inflation, where a pressure, so we protect the employees against that. In my personal view, in my worldview, the ideal world can that if you are an engineer who is as good as an engineer in San Francisco, but you're in Lahore, you should be paid the same. आज ऐसे नहीं है. Google भी जो है, उनके levels होते हैं internally, right? Same level engineer आपका अगर वो इंडिया में होता है, वही जो है मंगलोर में है, वही अगर San Francisco में है, they get paid based upon their local area. And I think that is not fair because अगर आप लाहौर में उसी level के हैं जो San Francisco के हैं, you had to struggle a lot more. आपके पास स्टैनफोर्ड नहीं थी, आपके पास बर्कले नहीं थी. You did not have Googles, you did not have Apples to work at and learn from. So why are you being penalized for being born in a poor country? So I think a complete bakwas hai. Like I think in an ideal world, if there's an assessment, it should not be linked to where you are born, where you are living. I don't think that calculus should work. तो यहाँ पे थोड़ी बात आती है. There is a bit of corporate greed here. There's a bit of कि जी अगर if you can pay them less, you can get away with it. तो क्यों ना करें? तो and eventually I want कि if we really have somebody here, if they would be if you find an equal engineer in the valley, if they're going to be earned higher, then they should be paid as much. But that is my naive, idealistic view on this topic.
Yeah. I would imagine you must be a popular employer in this industry, if that's the way you're going about it. So,
let's hope so.
I hope so. AI के एक दो और specific points भी हैं. I want to hold that for a bit because एक दो a bit more let's say academia focused एक दो points थे, I think still in the pipeline. एक तो मैं वो can maybe emphasize the point. It leads to a question as well, I suppose. लेकिन वो जो आप scientific method की बात कर रहे थे ना, the reason I wanted to highlight that it resonates really strongly with the discussion we were having with the earlier guest, I think Dr. Ali Khayyam से, कि वो जो feedback cycle, Nash, you said कि academia में it's a very long cycle, and his view was that it's effectively non-existent, not even a non-long cycle, in the sense that there's no penalty for lousy teaching as such. You can not produce good graduates, not teach well, and या तो वो आपको 6 साल बाद पता चल रहा होगा या वो भी साइकिल शायद हो ही नहीं रहा. और क्या कहते हैं इंसेंटिव जो है, इंसेंटिवाइज जो चीज़ हुई भी है वो पाकिस्तान में आजकल पब्लिकेशन एंड इम्पैक्ट फैक्टर जर्नल्स, और उसमें फिर देयर इज अ होल स्टोरी देयर एंड वी हैव हैड अ लॉट ऑफ डिस्कशंस ऑन दोज एज वेल. तो ये साइकिल जो है, एक तो इसको मेरे ख्याल से पहले क्रिएट करना और फिर शॉर्टन करना. What would you suggest is the way to go about it? How do you keep having that reality check कि हमारे graduates निकल के industry ready नहीं है, तो it should feedback. The dean and the faculty should be sitting together and saying कि why is this not happening? What did you do in your data structures and software engineering course के आपके students जो है नहीं compete कर पा रहे? ये information ही नहीं वापस आ रही. Which had you have any comments on how to, I would probably say, create this cycle and then maybe shorten it both?
Well, it is definitely a hard question. There is recently an innovative model in the Valley. वो इस तरह से है कि this is not for the 4-year degree, but this is, let's say, polytechnic 9 महीने का program, in which they will not charge you anything for the training. They will give you high quality training for, let's say, teach you how to program, whatever. And the deal is that once you get your job, if it is above a certain threshold, let's say $50,000-$60,000 a year, so they will take a fraction of that, and there's a well-defined fraction in advance, and then they will basically fuel. They will pay back their investment in you through that, right?
Brilliant.
So that's sort of the idea in that, but वो उसमें मसले हैं because it's a long-term investment, it's a multi-year play, and so there is an institute called Bloom Tech, which sort of started this, made it popular. I have not seen, to my knowledge, applied this to a 4-year program, but that is the most extreme version of this. Okay, you don't get paid till the graduate not only gets placement, but gets placement at a place high enough that they make enough money for you to start getting paid, right?
Right. Yeah.
But in a way, this model sounds really attractive. कि आपने कोई pay नहीं किया education के लिए, you get, you basically, it aligns the employer with the institute. Whether this aligns with the student or not, because now they might not have skin in the game, that's the question. But maybe they can have like a lower fee. So that's one thing. In the absence of that, what happens is just marketing, right? So हमने कहा कि GIKI जो है वो #1 institute है, and that's when I went there. और उसकी वजह है कि there was a 1997 ranking, and I forget वो listing किसने बनाई थी. And I was entering GIK. There was this 1997 international rankings where GIK was one of the top 10 institutes of this region. And so, so I think a way to force this is that any, I think, private company कोई इदारा कर सकता है, they can start collecting data on all of this. कि जी students graduate हो रहे हैं, they can do their own interview, they can get their own data, and or the government can sort of push towards this. कि they can make it more visible. कि आपके graduates. Where do most of your graduates go? You can actually do this research on LinkedIn. You can basically say कि इस institute के graduates typically किन institutes में जाते हैं, कहाँ jobs लेते हैं, क्या उस तरह के वहाँ पे भी कर सकते हैं. But अगर एक institute खुद interested है, they need to understand कि scorecard क्या है. And so if the first thing is जब बात करें कि पहले कहा कि measure ही नहीं करते. The first thing is start. You cannot manage what you don't measure. So the first thing is to measure the scorecard. Is it the number of, and most institutes focus on the running. कि जी हमारे ratio between faculty and students can papers कितने release हो रहे हैं, which is more operational metrics, and they're less to do with the success of the student. So if you incorporate the placement ratio percentage within a year, within 2 years, if that is something that you put into your top line KPIs, I think that would make a difference. I feel this is easy to do because every institute asks their alumni कि donations का भी पूछते हैं, but also they have information on them. So it's something which they can incorporate. So I guess ultimately वो नीयत पे बात बनती है ना कि वो institute करना चाहता है कि नहीं करना चाहता, because it is hard, especially being transparent is hard. And again, Pakistan इस जगह में अगर सिर्फ आप transparency दिखा रहे हैं and you are then opening showing कि हम यहाँ पे इतना अच्छा perform नहीं कर रहे, और अगर कंपटीशन आपका जो है उसको लेता है कहता देखा इनकी तो इनका जी ये काफी खराब है, and they don't disclose their own thing, so you have to sort of do it in a way कि you have to be little, I guess, marketing savvy आपको चाहिए यहाँ पे. It's doable. I think sincerity works really well. If you are doing this because you want to help your students, I think if people can see that, I think that can work. But yeah, it depends on the institute itself. I don't think there's nothing stopping them from incorporating a feedback loop.
Sorry, Naman, I kind of seem to be occupying the mic much more today. लेकिन वो it's a related question, and it goes a bit towards perhaps the philosophy of it in education. के मेरी colleague से यहाँ बात हुई थी और he was basically talking about some Amazon person's keynote speech in some conference, and like she was really ticked off about वो कहते कि like he was telling us the academia what kind of graduates we need. तो वो हमें बता रहा था कि आप इस तरह के skills दें, इस तरह की वो करें, और वो जिस बात पे उसको गुस्सा था कि how presumptuous of him to assume that's what we are producing. मतलब who told you that that's what our job is, to produce graduates for your industry, or not Amazon specifically, but the tech industry in general. That comes back to that as well कि यूनिवर्सिटी के रेडार के अंदर ये चीज ऑब्वियसली होनी चाहिए, मतलब नो डाउट अबाउट इट कि आप टेक इंडस्ट्री रेलेवेंट ग्रेजुएट्स प्रोड्यूस कर रहे हैं. बट इज दिस पार्ट ऑफ a bigger, a more complex picture in general, and then where Pakistan as a country is today? क्या अभी हमारा प्रायोरिटी के अंदर यार कम से कम competent graduates प्रोड्यूस टेक इंडस्ट्री में फिट हो? We'll start producing leaders and thinkers in the next iteration that just get competent people out there. Tools सिखाओ, languages सिखाओ, वो करो. तो ये what do you see university roles that way is? कितना prominent ये होना चाहिए? Junaid, want to add something to that? Please do.
If I could add to it and also connect it to what Nash Saab said earlier, or I think ये grounded भी हो जाएगी discussion बहुत high level रखने की बजाय, क्योंकि he did say कि वो अपने hires में या recruitment के वक्त critical thinkers is what he's looking for, right? तो वो यानी if नसरुल्लाह अपने प्रोडक्ट और इंजीनियर्स को, डेव साइड को नई रिक्रूटमेंट के लिए, if he has an assessment, एक तो पहले we would also love to know how do you assess for that, कि कोई बंदा क्रिटिकल थिंकर है कि नहीं. तो वो हम छोड़ देते हैं, वो यूनिवर्सिटीज और कोई ऑनेस्ट सेल्फ रिफ्लेक्शन रखता है. आई थिंक जो रखता है वो नियत वाली बात भी हो गई है. वो they would get to learn from Nasrullah's experience. अगर critical thinking skill है कि नहीं, तो आई एम श्योर यूनिवर्सिटीज के पास तो फिर 4 साल हैं और हर टीचर के पास पूरा सेमेस्टर लॉन्ग टाइम होता है, तो दे कैन बिल्ड ऑन दैट इंशाल्लाह. तो ये आई वुड लव टू नो कि आप क्रिटिकल थिंकिंग तो ऑलरेडी ही इज मेंशन्ड वकार के वो सिर्फ आपको टेक्निकल स्किल्स और सिर्फ वो एक खास पीएचपी या पाइथन एक टूल लेवल चीज इज नॉट व्हाट इज लुकिंग फॉर.
बिल्कुल. सो आई गेस हम क्या करते हैं कि हम टिपिकली 4 एरियाज को असेस करते हैं. We've always been a distributed company since the very beginning. So since the time we started the company in 2017, so we place a lot of emphasis on your quality of communication. So one of the 4 things we do is कि हम आपकी communication को देखते हैं. So typically we internally run the IELTS test in our interview process. So we'll do IELTS spoken English आपका test करते हैं कि आप कितना अच्छा उसमें करते हैं. And there's things around कि जी आप how much do you correct yourself, how clear is your understanding, how clear is your communication, and so on. The other thing we check for is we will run through questions around just raw intelligence, problem solving around that. And so that's a big part of the whole thing. And then the third is specific to your area. We'll ask questions around, if you are, for example, in development, we'll ask you questions around different concepts or relevant things around that. Fourth goes into your employment history. And what we're looking for in employment history is the following. Has this person worked at an institute and they got promoted? That's a signal that we look for. For example, you worked for some place for 5 years. Did you make an impact over there? And we typically like to ask, what was your impact over there? Like, tell us your highlight over there. This is obviously not for, let's say, fresh students, but for fresh students, we'd like to ask things that they do beyond what was required of them, like beyond their, if you, for example, somebody likes programming, or what did you do on your hobby on your own time, something like that. So that's typically our process in that. I can go into more detail into what some of the details over there are, but that's more or less broadly what we look for over there. To Wakar, your question about, to be like I said, I think you have to be very wary about who's asking for what. So if it's a call center, if you go to them in Pakistan, I would guarantee you they will not say that the graduates is the problem. They will not say that we don't have enough graduates. They might say, however, that we need more English-speaking graduates, which is a unique, specific problem. Which and most of these places have a naturalization and neutralization English course inside. So they will have like entire batch of employees hired, 50 at a time. They will teach them how to basically people in the Indo-Pak subcontinent have enunciated T's and D's, and so they'll help them become clearer in that sense, right? But so it really depends on who you're asking for. I do think as an industry, whether that is through PASHA, which is the Software House Association, whether that is the labor board or whichever, they should definitely provide aggregate numbers on the kind of roles are in demand from the industry. And that could be, these are the blue collar workers and then the division in that. These are the white collar workers and then the division in that. And even white collar is just too broad a term. And so if you are a university, you need to be clear on what is your goal. You cannot just be generally educating the populace. What you also need to figure out is, are you producing people for higher education? Do you want to optimize for that? Or do you want to optimize for the industry? You can do both, but as long as you're clear about that. Amazon, as an example, has both a huge blue collar requirement, as a white collar requirement as well. And the reason, well, in some cases, Amazon might not be the best because Amazon has like 1 million plus employees, and on the blue collar side, they run through employees very quickly. So the entire workforce gets replaced twice a year. So they have a very high churn and they replace very fast. And they recently complained that the United States does not have enough people for them to employ as blue collar worker within their warehouses, right? Which is a unique problem. I think that's very Amazon specific because they literally wear out the people that they hire. But I think it's hard. So this goes back to what you were saying, Numan, about the product that you create. So you have to do market research. You have to figure out what is the demand of the industry. If you're going to focus on the local industry, you have to have a 5, 10, 15-year horizon, because what will Pakistan look like when this kid graduates in 4 years? What should we have? What skills should they have by then? I think some skills are definitely timeless. I talk about critical thinking. I talk about decision-making, things like that. That is important. But on the same time, tools are also important, because tools is the practical implementation of those techniques that you've learned. So that's also a very important thing to have. You cannot just have someone who's a very good, for example, a very good critical thinker could be a bachelor in philosophy, right? They're really good at thinking through things. But in practical case, how do they apply themselves? So the key thing that we look for in the hiring process, the reason why the fourth thing I mentioned was we look at how well did you do in your previous job, or what did you do, is we want to make sure you're a person who can get things done. So I think as an institute, you have to figure out why you exist, what is your goal, and is that to fuel the local industry? Is that to fuel higher education, adding to that pipeline? Or is it both? Is it an export? Whatever that is, you should optimize for that. I think the worst thing to do would be not to optimize or not have any goal at all. I think not having a measure in place would be worse than having a measure in place.
Yeah, I think that resonates really strongly with why since our first podcast, ये चीज किसी न किसी फॉर्म में रिकर हुई है कि पहले अपना क़िबला दुरुस्त करें, decide what you want to be and kind of do it, because not every university can or even should be lumped. Every university has to produce top class research publications or the next Nobel laureate. They have to have your vision clearly defined, or that thing kind of follow on from that. But if that's not there, then it's kind of a hopeless situation to start off with.
So, it sort of goes back to that comment about the being assessment oriented. Is your goal to educate people, or is your goal to produce the highest qualified graduates? Because if you want to produce the highest qualified graduates, then you should just fire the bottom 50 students, right? And automatically आपका जो है quality wise आपका बढ़ जाएगा वहाँ पे.
Yes.
So for example, every institute has this, right? कि अगर आपके 2 semesters के अंदर probation आती है, which is a score below 2, आपको निकाल देते हैं, which is mind-boggling to me. Like I feel the kid who is performing under 2 needs the most help. So yes. I feel there's a lot of misalignment over there, right? So but again, it's your genesis. Why do you exist? And sorry, Junaid, you're going.
हाँ, एक तो ये कि आपकी ये जो IELTS और फिर वो प्रॉब्लम सॉल्विंग और फिर ऑफ कोर्स टेक्निकल इंटरव्यू के दौरान जो आपकी असेसमेंट होती है, does it have a very high correlation with the GPAs that the students are coming in with?
That's a good question. I would hazard to say it would not, या might not. And it GPA की quality जो है, one of the things that we've seen is different institutes have a different quality and distribution of GPAs. And so a GPA, for example, a high GPA in LUMS would mean very different from a high GPA on a relatively tertiary institute. But one of the questions I love asking graduates, I always ask two questions. The first question I ask is, what is your GPA? And it doesn't matter what they say. They can say 2.1, they could say 3.99. And the question I ask is, so why is it so low? Right? and, and the student is always embarrassed. And what I'm looking for there is, how do they, so this goes back to that idea, how transparent are you? The good answer is, the reason why it's not good is because maybe I didn't study as hard. Maybe I wasn't that interested, right? There is ownership, there is accountability, there is transparency, and there is self-reflection there. A bad answer is, oh, my institute is really bad, my teachers are really crap, nobody cared about me. There is externalization of the and so I think that is an important thing in that. So bad GPAs are completely fine as long as you have a really good reason to back that up with. I myself had a notoriously bad GPA. I barely made it through. I'm not a shining example by any way, but GPA is typically better within the first position you have, and then what you did in the first position significantly outweighs your academics.
I think you had it coming, Nasrullah, but why did you have such a low GPA?
So it started off with that same thing, right? I wanted to be in computer science. I ended up going electronics, which was fine. And then before that, I wanted to not be in academics. I wanted to be out there building things, building a company. And so what I did was I started doing all these projects. I took over the institute's website. I started doing these projects. So I would do a lot of programming. And there's a funny story. In my first semester, there was a 2-credit-hour computer science course, CS 101, which had I think a 1-credit-hour lab. It was like a 3-credit-hour course. And I spent a full month working 8 hours a day designing a 3D game from scratch. This is back in the day when there was Turbo C. Like, this is not GUI, this is not graphical. I wrote a Turbo C. So I wrote my own engine, I wrote my own driver, I did this whole thing. And it was my interest, but it was in at the sacrifice of all other subjects. And so I remember that when I gave the presentation, everybody else was showing things like chess, people showing things like a tic-tac-toe game, and I come up and I show a fully 3D guy moving through like Doom and like the whole thing with a Turbo C, the whole thing, and the faculty gives me a standing ovation, but but that's where I sort of got distracted. So I got much more deeper into what I loved, which was computers and building and programming. So I think by the time I graduated, I had worked in almost 22 different programming languages in some shape or form. But that was my excuse. Not a really good one, but that's what I would like to tell my parents when they ask me.
No, I would hire you. Yeah,
that's a very good answer. अच्छा, हमने शुरू में कुछ डिस्कशन की है, and I love what you said about the future university. If it was up to you, तो वो किस टाइप के मॉडल के ऊपर बिल्ट होती, किस तरह का pedagogical मॉडल ना. लेकिन if it was also up to you, हम एक Nash universe में रह रहे हैं, imagine. तो the kind of graduates that you're looking for, जिसमें आपको मुझे ऐसी सेंस मिली है कि वो एक बड़ा बैलेंस होना चाहिए, कुछ फिलोसॉफिकल वाला भी होना चाहिए, बट एब्सोल्युटली टेक्निकल भी एट द सेम टाइम होना चाहिए. तो वो करिकुलम किस टाइप का यू वुड लव टू सी यूनिवर्सिटी में उनको पढ़ाया जा रहा हो, इफ इट वाज अप टू यू, एंड गिवन द फैक्ट कि यू वांट टू हायर those graduates for the kind of stuff that you do in your company?
That's a very hard question, and I feel I might not be the best person to answer this fully. Beyond the philosophical basis, critical thinking, communication, reasoning, ability to express yourself, beyond these core, like a scientific method, first principles thinking, beyond that, then it becomes subject specific. And so you want to layer on the subject on top of that. But I feel a lot of people are not taught epistemology, at least they're not taught how to learn. Like kids are taught if to focus nahi kare, but nobody tells you how to focus. What does it mean to focus? So hota kya hai ki the kids who do well are lucky because either they had older siblings who they saw how they were studying and they learned from that, or they had a parent who told them, "Kicha, ye samajh nahi aa rahi, so this is how you want to debug this. This is how you might want to learn this." And so every institute takes for granted that you have the ability to learn. And at no stage throughout education, aapko padhaya nahi jata. So this ability has become so important that I'll give you a quick side question. One of our product designers, he came up to me, very talented young guy, very tech savvy, comes to me and says, "Nash, what is the future of my field?" Maine kaha, "Kya hua?" So a product designer basically designs the UI and the UX of the whole product. There's a product called Galileo which uses AI, and you can just say, "Kichi mujhe filan UI bana do," it just creates the whole thing. So what is my job here? I gave him a rather long answer, but at the core of it, it is your ability to learn quickly, and that goes back to how you've been taught how to learn and how to relearn and unlearn as well. But the answer I gave to him was if you have limited amount of time, you want to focus. Everybody has an infinite to-do list. This is the reality of a knowledge worker. There is an unlimited task list. And the way you handle that is you prioritize it. And then you want to focus on things which have the highest leverage. And by that we mean, अगर आपका काम है ईंटें उठाना, तो जितना टाइम आप उतनी ईंटें उठा सकते हैं. There is not much more that you can do. But a high leverage activity is something which keeps on giving you value even later on. Maybe you hire someone to lift ईंटें for you, right? Maybe you build a machine that can put the bricks for you. And now even when you're sleeping, आपको काम चल रहा है. Making a YouTube video is a high leverage activity because आप एक जब आपने चीज explain कर दी है, you don't have to explain it to every person again and again. And this could be an internal company process. कि जी course register कैसे करना है. You can just give a 5-minute video.
What will it be rare?
So that is high leverage. That's the thing you should be doing. Now, as you become more senior, a high leverage activity, you get more resources, you get more people, you get more things to execute your vision. And so the idea there is to think of AI as just another assistant for you, and you're using that to get things done. So पहले होता था कि you might just have like one, if you're a designer, आप एक दिन लगा के एक concept बना के लाते थे. Now you can use the AI to build 10 concepts for you. And you go back and show it कि this is the best result से ये है, so on. So the idea here is that you, because the world is changing very quickly, what we want to do is we want to understand what these new tools do and how best can you use them to further your goals, whatever those might be. So I think that is the most important thing for people to learn. This does not necessarily mean university level education. This is something you might be taught very early on, but certainly a university better tests this concept.
अच्छा, so the एक topic जो recurrent आया है और we were keeping that because we are hitting around 2 hours and I appreciate it. Is it past midnight already or getting there?
It's an hour
But-
before.
Oh yes, you're right. It's hitting 11 in a bit. Lekin AI is, obviously it's still relatively new phenomena. इसकी जो penetration इतनी ज़्यादा हो गई है लाइफ में, और अब एजुकेशन में भी इसका इम्पैक्ट होगा. हम लोगों के लिए, दिस इज for us, for example, sitting in our department here at Glasgow, it's an unknown beast in some ways for us as well, in the sense that we have not really figured out our response yet exactly. What does it mean in terms of
Oh god,
assessments
they
and
could
so on?
really do it like this.
लेकिन अगर हम इसकी implication maybe at least दो dimension मेरे ध्यान में आ रहे हैं. एक for teaching, we have kind of, I think we have touched upon that already. So maybe the question is, can you want to add anything to that? Okay, teaching के अंदर, pedagogy के अंदर क्या role हो सकता है? If I understand your view correctly, especially अगर हम mastery based learning की तरफ pivot करें, तो उसमें this can now enable that and enable kind of the scaling as well. So do you have anything more to add in terms of how teaching should evolve in a CS software engineering program in view of the fact that it's out there now for us as instructors to use, for students to potentially access as well? And the other part of the question, you can maybe take those together, is for the software engineering profession. क्या implications हैं? Again, you have touched upon that. So software engineering के skills अब किस किस्म पे चाहिए होंगे आपको, and kind of how does that feed back to what we should be doing at the university? So sorry, it's a bit loaded question, I suppose, but we have touched upon some of these things. But over to you.
It's still early days, so it's also hard to understand all the implications. I think it will take us years, 3 or 4 or 5 years, just to understand all the different ways we can use AI. And on the state that it is today, it will keep improving, but just on that, it will take us a few years on that. I think AI has an implication, not just in computer science. Obviously, it has an implication across the board. One of the things I mentioned early on was that, like I mentioned, these 3 hypothetical brackets, like this entry level specification following this mid-level, high level. And what I've alluded here is that AI can act as a level below this as a starting point. So the people here who are just conforming to spec, they can use AI to accelerate what they're doing, and they'll become more productive. They're able to do things quicker, faster. But slowly what might happen is that this bottom layer might actually go away. It might get replaced with AI, and the people there need to now upskill themselves to enter that middle layer. And so that sort of the entry level layer you might want to replace that with will get replaced to some degree with AI. And the nature of your job changes. You end up becoming, everyone ends up becoming essentially a prompt engineer. You basically,
That's about to say.
How do you ask a question in a way that responds to your solution? That's just sort of a starting point over there. This actual problem has existed in software, in the software profession for many, many years. And the question is, most of people understand that most software interview for jobs are pretty bad. So for example, if I ask you a question in an interview and you're not able to answer it, but if you're given access to Google and you're able to find the answer in 5 minutes, how is that bad? Because that is more realistic. So there are these take-home assignments as well in the software engineering world, where you basically give a problem which they can solve. Open source companies do this. They have their entire code online, and they have publicly reported problems, and they ask candidates, if you solve any of these tickets marked out for you or anybody, we look at that and we'll use that as a basis of assessment and hiring you. So it's like the same idea. Should you allow an open book exam, and does it mean only book? Can you also use the internet, because that is more closer to the real life version of this? Should you allow AI in this? So I'm not sure what the correct answer here would be, or a useful answer here would be, but in terms of, you want to mimic the reality of the actual environment where the person is going to be. So if an engineer has access to Google, if they have access to all these other things, what you want to do is you want to see them problem solved in the best possible way. And that would be a really good way to assess things. 90% companies don't do that. Really, a few high quality companies give you a take-home assignment, which you come back with a solution as well. But I think that's one of the things over there. It's hard to say what other implications would be in terms of AI, but I think AI is now yet another tool in your repository. It's like having a very high-powered calculator of sorts. Ek zamana tha where we would fight against having a calculator in schools, but I think now schools have said, nahi, calculator aap kar le, theek hai. first few years तक आपको math जब सिखाए थे उस time नहीं था, but now that you're done तो उस पे आप कर लें. It sort of is in that sense, in that way.
Everything.
I'm not sure what all the further implications downstream क्या होंगे. अभी भी AI जो है is relatively weak. A few more iterations, it becomes really, really powerful. So for example, आप AI को अपनी एक किताब नहीं दे सकते. So the way AI works is LLMs, which are large language models, and these are basically pre-trained on existing data. So आप अभी उन्होंने ये किया है कि जो लेटेस्ट वर्जन्स आए हैं GPT-4 देखेंगे तो उन्होंने पहले कहा था कि आप सिर्फ 4000 का आपका टोकन विंडो कहते हैं उसकी वो थी, which is like 3000 words. अब उन्होंने उसको बढ़ा कर 32,000 कर दिया है, right, or 25K words or so. But now, but if you want to teach it a book, it's like so that is slowly improving. And so एक point आएगा कि आप AI को कहेंगे ये मेरी 10 किताबें ये तुम सीख लो, अब इन किताबों की बेस पे इन चीजों का जवाब दो. आजकल ये पॉसिबल है कि उसके कुछ हैक्स होते हैं, but that's something that, but yeah, as it improves, I think we're maybe less than a year away from this becoming a reality. जो मैं कह रहा हूँ, उसके बाद because many companies have specialized knowledge, right? Specialized product होती है, they have around specialized things. So if you are able to feed it the specialized information without having to train the whole model on it, which is a much longer thing, it becomes easier for the end person to do it. It becomes more easier for people to start using it in that way. But I feel that a lot more disruption is coming down the line as well. And it's hard to say all the implications of that.
But इसमें I think again, I think echoing what you were saying, कि critical thinking, creative thinking, communication skills. Hopefully, I mean, if I am reading you correctly, they will sustain as an important skill to have, no matter जो भी disruptions AI की आती हैं. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I definitely do. In the example I was telling you about with an employee of mine who was a product designer. So if you're a product designer in a, let's say, iPhone के product designer है, आपके नीचे 1000 product designer और काम कर रहा है, right? And in order for you to design the iPhone, you need that many people under you, right? And a single person obviously can't do that. What happens is कि बजाय 1000 लोग, so there is a, कहते हैं genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. वो जो 99% perspiration है, वो आपको सारा कुछ खुद करना पड़ता है to duke it out, right? अब वो, I think half of that gets automated for you, which is, I think, great. Which means you can do more things faster. You can sort of automate away the mundane tasks which you usually might have to do. In that sense, this is an optimistic view of AI. That is win-win. But people who want to stay in this, let's say this the entry-level tiers की बात करें, this will pose a significant risk. और ये हर generation में होता है. Every time there's a new technology introduced, the word calculator itself used to be a person before the abacus and mechanical calculators became used. It was a team of people used to do this, right? So they all sort of had to change their roles. And the only thing that helps you or saves you from that is that critical thinking is your ability to learn, relearn, unlearn, and move up in that way. So I feel Uswale say universities do play an important role in getting you ready for that very fast-moving world.
Historical note में तो I think computers के साथ भी से ये नहीं, this term of computers, this also meant a person जो कि manual labor करता था ना और फिर compute करता था, लेकिन अब इसकी एक different connotation है, of course. But I think we've come a full circle, वकार के I believe जहाँ से start हुई थी और नसरुल्लाह का जो मतलब पूरी life journey है, he's been a builder and वो हमेशा से builder बनना चाहते थे. I think those who can make stuff versus तो एक ये बिल्कुल psychologically different profile होती है from those who just want to consume, the consumer जो होते हैं ना, तो वो बेशक जो builder profile वाले लोग हैं जो कि entrepreneurial side पे ज़्यादा होते हैं, वो बेशक जो मर्जी tool आए, वो ChatGPT 3 आए या 75 आ जाए, they'll end up creating stuff nevertheless, incorporating the new tool at hand. लेकिन for a lot of people जो बस consumer nature के हैं, वो तो फिर खुद भी consume होंगे और खुद भी एक tool बन जाएंगे शायद in the hands of technology lords. But thank you for this today, Nasrullah.
No, my pleasure. I feel everybody is a creator in some capacity, and I don't sort of mean just products. Creator could be somebody who writes an essay, writes a poem, again, makes a brand, designs a shirt. And so we all have this innate ability to create. But creation is definitely a different skill set than following spec. Not everybody is able to sort of do creation in that sense, in its highest form. Let's say everybody should do creation, but not everybody is very good at it. Just like okay, and I think there are tools available for creators now, and so the people who are mostly spec following, the craftsmen and things like that, I think there it's it requires them to do a lot of learning and relearning. But I think agree with what you're saying that for creators and builders, the AI is great. It's more about the people who are currently in that sort of implementation side. I think they have to retool themselves.
So I think to conclude, we can still kind of discuss offshoots from the discussion we've had. They can, I think, hit on 2 hours is probably we have text and Nasrullah quite a bit already. So normally we conclude is with like again keeping the overall audience in mind and the context of our discussion, higher education. Is there anything that you would have liked to said that did not come out organically in our discussion or questions? Addressing, for example, university students, teachers. Yeah.
I think we came through a lot of things. We touched upon many things. One thing I would advise students is most students like to rely on the university alone. So whatever the university will do, I will do. And if one of the things that we've seen is that if everybody of the entire graduating batch does the same thing, most profile end up looking the same because you're doing the same thing over there. And one thing that you can do now is you can get exposure early, and that could be simply doing simple things like freelancing, maybe an hour a week, 2 hours or 10 hours a week. It will help you build your communication skills. It will help you find out what's the process of finances involved, and then delivering something. It could be something as simple as you're working for someone to work on copy. It could be working on fixing code, bugs in a code, things like that. Some of the best students that we hired out of fresh technically had a couple of years of experience because they had been freelancing. And we hired them at salary levels which was reflectant of that. So they would be salaried as 2 years of experience rather than entry level. And so there are definitely opportunities over there. The other thing is that is real world experience. And so it should not distract you from your core goal of your education. But if you're able to carve time out, which at a student life, I believe you should be able to carve some time out for that, it's a great way to jumpstart your career. The other advice is that you might already have in mind a few places you might want to work at. A good thing to do is to go to those places, look at the job posted, look at the job descriptions over there, and see what skills do they require, and start understanding those things a year in advance. So look at them in advance and see. So they have something called Git over there. They have something called a particular technology. What are these things? And you can do brief courses, watch a video, just start building your understanding so that even in a conversation, directionally, the interview will understand that this person can figure this out. They've sort of looked into this and so on. I think that's the other advice for students here.
Brilliant. I think on that note, let's bring to a close. So once again, on behalf of all three of us and our viewers, thank you very much, Nasrullah, for giving us your time. I think it was been brilliant. Lots of food for thought here for students and for teachers as well. I loved the kind of convergence toward this mastery-based learning. I think that there's a lot to unpack there. I think we can learn a lot from that. और I think हमने एक topical बात भी कर ली आई के ऊपर. I think that's been on everybody's mind already. So anyway, thank you very much once again, and see you all in our next episode.
Thank you very much for having me. Take care.